Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well today, and thank you very much for being here. My name is Clark Hancock. I'm an interpretive consultant out of Austin, Texas, and currently serving as the treasurer of the PUP Global Heritage Consortium. We have several members of the consortium joining us today by way of Zoom and video, who will be sharing with us some of their experiences facilitating holistic approaches to interpretive planning, training, and leadership from projects throughout the Americas. The concept of holism is something that weaves its way throughout the practice of the art of interpretation. Even Freeman Tilden talked about telling a whole story and addressing the whole person. Sounds relatively simple, but in the real world it can be rather elusive. For it turns out that holism is more a description of an attitude and a journey than it is of a destination. At this point, I'm going to turn this presentation over to Dr. Antonieta Jiménez from the Colegio de Michoacán, and she also happens to be the founding director of Interpat MX. Thank you.
Hello, this is Antonieta Jiménez, professor and researcher at El Colegio de Michoacán, Mexico, director of Interpat MX, the Mexican Association for Interpretation, and a member of the board of directors in PUP Global Heritage Consortium. I feel very happy and proud to be part of a group of professionals from different parts of America with real knowledge and experience in holistic planning, with particular vision on the importance of communicating heritage values to the public. Interpretive planning and heritage holistic planning related to management issues have found in PUP a place to develop, experience, and share lots of how-to when we talk about meaningful and sustainable heritage. But before we see the outstanding work that Tracy, Mike, Luis, Jon, Clark, and Sherwood present today, I would love to set some ideas about the platform we all stand on. Heritage, natural and cultural heritage. What is it? What is it for? There are lots of interesting and anthropologically well-supported ideas and concepts about this such a big word. Very often I go to one written by one of the most brilliant anthropologists that Mexico has had, Guillermo Bonfil Batalla, who wrote in the 1990s an idea referring to cultural heritage. He said, when we talk about people's cultural heritage, we are referring to that collection of tangible or intangible cultural elements that a society considers from themselves. Heritage helps people to solve problems, from major crises to the seeming trifles of everyday life. Heritage helps to create and reformulate collective aspirations and projects. It helps to imagine, enjoy, and express oneself. Cultural heritage, as Bonfil Batalla refers, includes the relationship that people has with cultural elements and nature. It is why anthropological approach to heritage, both natural or cultural, is something we cannot escape from if we want to be part of a good change. The big learning is that heritage is about the synergy between two aspects. The elements, which could be things, sets of things, landscapes, ecosystems, and people's perceptions and decisions over those elements. Further, good planning, holistic planning, has to consider the relationship between elements and people within their own particular and contextual dynamism. In the practice, it is not easy, and we know. Holistic planning requires much more than the will to write a document. For planners, it requires also a big dose of humility in order to recognize that local practices are more important than external and imposed ideas if we want to achieve long-lasting and locally engaged projects. It requires, too, the recognition of the fact that heritage is a repository of a diversity of locally recognized values, which, to make the picture even more interesting, are also complemented by a set of academically recognized values. It, of course, implies that people from different perspectives will want to encourage different actions, which could confront other people's perspectives and obviously, which could affect the tangible decisions over those pieces of heritage. By saying so, we recognize that it requires the acceptance that sooner or later conflict will join us too. That's where we're going to say, hello, Mr. Conflict, come and feel very welcome. Planners must be prepared. They must have experienced tools on the pocket to deal with all that planning and practice process. If our aim is to have well-protected and responsibly used heritage from a sustainable perspective, we need to think heritage in a much more complex, dynamic, and holistic perspective. Along the process, making consensus among all the groups of people, beginning with locals and academics, and communicating the results about the importance of heritage or its values comes to be the greatest tool to reach a common vision. On the heritage conservation arguments for society, politicians, and visitors, heritage interpretation plays a key role, as it can help us to put everyone on the same platform, or at least at the majority of people. When we build a main reason to be of that piece of heritage and of the will to protect it, heritage conservation can be reached more easily. Holistic planning, which provokes the dialogue between locals, academics, planners, and other groups of people, has as one of its purpose the build of the ideas that will sustain the big project. It will embrace the reasons why the rest of the people, other locals or visitors, think that that piece of heritage needs to be protected for future generations. And heritage interpretation within its own planning process has to take these ideas and include them on their key messages. So, from north to south of the continent, I leave you now with some of the PUP's members who will share with us some of their own processes of experience, learning, and helping others to live their heritage in a more sustainable way. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Trace Gale. I'm the secretary for the PUP Global Heritage Consortium. I'm also a researcher at the Center for Patagonia Ecosystem Investigation in the Aysén region of Patagonia in Chile. And I'm speaking to you today from our farm. It's early morning here, early spring. Thought it would be much more fun for you and for me to tell you about the case study I'm going to tell you about in the context of the outdoors and the nature that's all around us here in Patagonia. Where we live, there is incredible nature all around us, but there is increasing presence and pressure of humans, of the fast-paced life of modernity, of tourism, and the impacts of tourism. And our protected areas are dealing with increased complexity and increased uncertainty each year. And so in 2015, the Coyhaique National Reserve did their first visitor use plan using the nationally approved processes, which are based on linear approaches and good hard science, and checking out the results of the final planning process with the public to inform them and let them know what the new regulations will be. And what they found is that just a few months after the plans had been implemented, they were no longer applicable. They weren't capable of dealing with the complex situations that were being thrown at managers. And they asked us to come in and make some recommendations. And about that time,
I had the opportunity to bring in Steve McCool, who's one of the advisors for the PUP Heritage Consortium, and learn about and start to implement some of the holistic interpretive planning practices that he and Jon and the rest of us at PUP have come to embrace so wholeheartedly.
So the triskel is a really helpful symbol to ground our work in integral theory and holistic planning methods. And it takes a 360-degree perspective amongst the three different dimensions that form the circle. The I, which reminds us to think about the individual ways in which heritage affects each of us. The we, which are the shared context, which are sometimes in parallel, aligned, and other times are in conflict, and the processes that we go through to develop consensus amongst our collective culture. And then the it, which is the science and the technology with which we evaluate and we manage our heritage to try to ensure its future. And it is the combination of paying attention to those three aspects of heritage that helps the integral planning process to differentiate itself from the more traditional processes of the past that were based on modernist principles. So this is one of my favorite trees on our farm. It's a huge coigüe, probably 100 years or older. And I love it because it always sits above our house and reminds me of the tree metaphor. And the tree metaphor is one of the ways that you can bring the triskel to life and think about I and we and it in a more tangible context with regards to planning. So you think about the tree, and it's got this huge system of roots that go down into the ground, and then it's got the upper limbs and the leaves. And in order to have the tree be healthy, you have to take care of the entire system. The I and the we represent the roots, the things that ground our planning. And the leaves and the branches are the it, the structures, the technologies, the tools, the methods that we use in order to make the entire tree or protected area come together and function as a system. So in the planning process, the ways that we worked on developing team, the I, and engaging culture, the we, were multiple. We used a flexible planning team configuration that brought in people from the outside, guides, and different groups of stakeholders. We shared the responsibilities between CONAF and the different groups of stakeholders and experts that worked on the plan. And we coordinated through Google Drive and other technology-based mechanisms that permitted us to talk to each other and share files and share resources along the way. We viewed the visitor use plans as a beginning rather than as an end or a definitive answer. And that really, really helped us to understand that we didn't have to solve all of the problems in the planning process. What we needed to do was identify those problems and start the conversations, and then prioritize what we would be working on in the first years of the plan. In terms of engaging culture, participatory conversations were emphasized early, often, to facilitate trust building, to facilitate collaboration, to facilitate a shared commitment in the plan that we were developing. So we involved participation on their terms. We used multiple formats. A lot of people here in Patagonia aren't very technology savvy, so we went door to door often. We would sit and we'd have conversations over mate, which is a typical drink here. We would invite them to meetings. We do participatory mapping, all kinds of different things. We did a lot of work in the field with treks and different types of hikes where we would brainstorm along the way. We also used formal recreation experience studies in the reserve to help us get the visitors' point of view as they were finishing or beginning their recreation activities. And then the completed plans, we went back to the community and we presented those plans in an interactive session in which the community really got to know the action steps and the priorities of the plan, and were invited to commit right there at the forum to being on different committees and different projects that would get the plan implemented. So the it of the TRISCO in our public use planning process, it focused on building skills and on influencing the systems that were in place here in the region in terms of the way that we looked at and interacted with and managed the Coyhaique National Reserve. So to give you an idea of the plan, I'll show you some of the pictures of the processes that we went through with our different groups of stakeholders. And I think it's really interesting to see how engaged they are in the planning process and how excited they are to be integrating with the reserve in a way that they find meaningful and in a way that respects how they view heritage, how the collective culture views heritage, and also in a way that enables them to develop new skills and to understand the technical language and the systems that are involved in protected area management. And I can say that in the 2 years that have followed the implementation of this plan, it's an ongoing process. It's not easy. There's always changing situations. The latest of which is COVID, which has our reserves having to follow whole new levels of public health protocols. But I think that the process has really marked a difference because now, instead of those administrators feeling like they are battling the people who visit the reserves, they feel like they're working with them and that they're working through the complex and they're working through those tough situations in an integral way. So I encourage you to learn more about integral theory and holistic planning practices, and I hope you'll become a part of PUP.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Mayer, and I'm coming to you today from Tucson, Arizona. But we're going to be looking at a project that's in Alberta, Canada. I'm with the group Experiential Interpretive Design, or EID, and we're organizational members of PUP. We really believe in their holistic approach to heritage site planning and to empowering local communities to develop plans to help protect and preserve heritage jewels around the world. We first got interested in PUP after reading the book, The Future Has Other Plans by Stephen McCool and Jon Kohl. We really liked its ideas and the process that it presented. For our visitor experience design, we also used a lot of the work from Steve Van Meter and the Institute for Earth Education, the interpretive design and the dance of experience. And we hope to use these we use these in this project, and we hope this presentation day will help you see how you can use some of this information as well. So to try to make the ideas and processes from both books as concrete as possible, I want to share the 10 design steps we used at Métis Crossing, a cultural heritage site of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Canada. I hope that the presentation will provide planners with things to consider when developing visitor experiences at heritage sites. First, let me tell you a story. Imagine you are a people that lived and prospered for thousands of years in a community rich with the gifts of nature. Suddenly, people from another part of the earth invaded and colonized the land. You are oppressed, humiliated, and forced to give up much of your land and culture. At times, the fear and the shame are so great you hide your lineage, even from your children, because you fear discrimination. Despite it all, your culture, stories, and language endure and persevere. Then things begin to change. In the 1980s, your country recognizes you as a distinct nation. Within a decade, there are new agreements with the federal and provincial governments. Lands and rights are restored along with reparations. The descendants of the invaders are more aware of the important role your people and culture played in the history of the colonized land. You no longer want to hide in plain sight. This, in brief, is the story of the Métis people and culture in Canada. The Métis people no longer hide in the shadows, and they can proudly proclaim the importance of their contributions to Canada. Métis Crossing is a place where the Métis people can tell their story without the filter of provincial, federal, or colonist viewpoints. The 10-step holistic process we used include 3 different stages. And this first stage in the process was engaging the community and really digging into the whys. We wanted to know why Métis Crossing was important and what the Métis people wanted visitors to take away. And of course, we wanted to introduce our planning process. So we gathered for a day with elders, officers of the Métis Nation in Alberta, the Métis Crossing staff, the Cultural Advisory Committee, and other organizations working with the Métis. And it was a day filled with excitement and deep memories and tears and a bit of cautious optimism about working with these two non-Métis guys. And the group shared their feelings of pride and excitement at being able to tell the Métis story in their own way. When introducing our process, we explained our role as coaches, not consultants or experts in education, leisure, interpretation. Our process offered scaffolding and feedback so the Métis could create a plan for the future. Then we presented some of our ideas regarding the 4 H's, the head, the heart, the hands, and the hunger. These are 4 of the 15 steps in the Van Meter book, using a holistic approach to experiential planning and visitor takeaways. These 4 are embedded in every experience and every outcome. The next stage was then to do the planning for site outcomes and essences, really preparing the visitors to arrive. We took the information from that day of the gathering, and Bill Reynolds and I looked at the information and came up with a list of what we thought were really important aspects that visitors should take away. We took this to a smaller group of the Métis staff. They looked at it, refined it, and eventually had it approved by the Culture Committee, and came up with 6 essences that visitors should take away when they visit Métis Crossing: becoming a nation, relations and families, economic life and entrepreneurship, land and water relationships, creative expressions, and belief systems. Next, we needed to do the what's. We first focus on these what's or outcomes, because what do you want visitors to take home in their head, hand, hearts, heads, stomachs, and these must see, must do, must learn, must feel, must taste, and must take home experiences and items. So we developed a 12-page outcome inventory, and the outcomes connect to the site mission, to the natural and cultural processes, and to the essences. And this is just a sample from one of the essences, the land and water relationship for each of these: the head, the heart, the hand, the hunger, and the processes. Next, we decided who we were going to focus on to practice this process of development with outcomes for the visitor experience. You could choose the most frequent visitor, maybe there's a visitor type you need, but the Métis Crossing folks decided on the half-day visitor, who was only going to be there for 2 to 3 hours, and they chose the Buffalo camp as the place where they would focus on their experience. And they came up with a schedule so they could see how much time they would have. The visitor might want to do different things. And then we created an outline for an immersing experience. This is a 30-60 minute deep dive into a part of Métis culture, and it's connected to the mission, essence, and processes and outcomes, and of course includes the 4 H's. And after we had that, we could then do a shorter invitational interaction of 10 to 20 minutes long, which might be more appropriate for the half-day visitor. It gives them a taste of the immersive experience, connects to the mission, essence, processes, and outcomes, of course, incorporates the 4 H's, and we actually create a very concrete, what we call a matrix, that helps them then see exactly what they are going to do with the visitor and what the visitor will participate in. It has the essences it focuses on, and they take something from the head, the heart, the hands, and the hunger from that outcome inventory to create this invitation interaction matrix. The last part of the planning is how do we get the visitors to really participate, what we like to call the ways. The first thing we have to see is what location are we going to use for the visitors. So we created a map. Actually, we created 3 maps. There's a potential one where all the potential places are they could use, an actual one where actual things are happening, and what might be missing. And at Métis Crossing, this is what the potential sites looked like. And finally, a site was chosen where they would do the buffalo camp. The ninth step in the process is actually designing an activity matrix. And this is where the real fun part begins. And, you know, a lot of staff members like to go right to this kind of designing the experience, but in EID, we like to make sure we have the outcomes very clear first. For the head, for the heart, the hands, and the hunger. What are people going to achieve? How do we motivate them to participate? And then how do we organize the experience so it feels integrated and whole? And finally, the last step in the process is to reinforce and evaluate. Decide, you know, where else the outcomes can be reinforced and how you're going to make sure you did what you said you were going to do. This evaluate really is part of the holistic feedback loop to determine if the experience is really working. Now, right now at Métis Crossing, there aren't as many activities to reinforce, but in the future, this is what they are definitely planning to do. I think it's also important to remember how this Triskel is an important part of the planning process with the I, the we, and the it. With the I, we needed to consider what the Métis were thinking, what we were thinking, what attitudes we brought in to help us do the design process. With the we need to look at some cultural aspects of what was going on. It became very important for Bill and I to learn more about the Métis people and their culture and their ways. And it was important for those at the Métis Crossing to learn more about interpretive design. And finally, there were things that were out of our control. There were external forces in terms of economics, in terms of time, in terms of natural things that were happening, especially the COVID in these times, that really were a part of this entire process. And this symbol, this model, really helped bring all this together in an important way. So that's our presentation from Canada, the 10 steps in our interpretive design process for experiential activities at Métis Crossing. Thank you very much for listening today, and we're off to Colombia and Luis. Take it away, Luis.
Thanks, John. I'm excited to be able to share some of our work with the NAI community. My name is Luis Camargo. I am the founder and director of OpEPA, the Organization for Environmental Education and Protection in Colombia. As we have heard, it is clear that a holistic approach to interpretation is fundamental to capture and share the essential elements emerging in a territory. Nonetheless, it is vital to consider how we can capture these elements into a coherent document that serves people and places. How can we do this, making sure we include what I call the voice of the territory as the guiding principle? Thematic frameworks have been used in different formats and ways since the 1930s. After working with themes and incorporating some of Van Matter's ideas, we realized that they were not enough, and the process needed to evolve into a holistic interpretative framework. Interpretation is the branch of communication that forges that relationship. For that to happen, visitors must know the heritage elements, reflect on the meaning of place, understand the processes and universal forces that created it and continue to transform it, as well as live its essence. The interpretative framework is the tool that allows identifying and ordering these aspects. It highlights the issues that will serve as a structure in the elaboration and execution of interpretative products and media. This is how interpretative frameworks becomes the fundamental element in strategic planning for the interpretation of protected areas. There are four main components in an interpretative framework. The foundations are the cultural and natural heritage attributes, which are those that make this territory unique and special, such as intangible expressions, stories of place, and outstanding features. Then there are the messages or themes that speak of the attributes and convey their magic. The messages need to account for the universal processes or forces responsible for the territory to evolve uniquely. The territory's essence is the umbrella and must represent these three: heritage attributes, messages, and universal forces. Territories can be complex. So how can we learn to listen to a territory's voice and its natural and cultural heritage deeply? Working in the Americas, especially in rural Latin America territories with a very high cultural and biological diversity, we realized it was fundamental to increase local actors and communities' participation in the planning process. It was no longer appropriate for interpretation professionals to gather and create the framework for a territory from a desk. Making local communities the main actors became a fundamental part of this process. The role we had changed from creation to facilitation and guidance of the process in multicultural communities. Considering many locals have not had access to education, reading and writing was sometimes a challenge. The facilitation process had to integrate a universal language. In order to integrate local oral tradition, academic, historical information, both environmental and social, and accept multiple languages to ensure access to indigenous communities. We devised strategies that broke down the conversations, allowing themes to emerge into a collaborative and conversational experience. Creating an open and inclusive space was essential, since having the broadest range of actors in the territory was critical to capture its true essence and ensure that many worldviews, cultures, and belief systems in the territory were represented. Research done before and the participation of local specialists for that territory in different areas of knowledge, such as earth sciences, biology, ecology, social and political history, and economics, would also add to the wealth of creative energy. In many cases, this was the first time these actors got together not to speak of their differences and conflicts, but to speak about their common heritage and listen to their land's voice. Initially, communities can be reluctant and edgy, but as the first minutes and hours pass, the process full of participatory activities in small groups, drawings, storytelling, where all the voices are deeply listened to, shifts the energy and empowers individuals to start speaking from their hearts and personal history, to recreate the territory's life timeline from as far as we can record it. Discussions shift from positions and opinions to identifying the common theme elements and the key processes that define the territory, which emerge collectively. As interpretation professionals, our role is to listen and sense for emergence, frame, and give back to the community for validation and adjustment. This process occurs many times until the main themes emerge, as well as the essence and universal processes that support them. The voice of the territory is heard. Throughout this process, it is easy to see a shift in the conversation and energy that allows local actors to connect from a different place, all feeling a part of a whole territory. Communities recognize themselves through their heritage, increasing self-esteem and a sense of belonging together. Throughout the Americans, we have refined and adapted the process of creating interpretative frameworks. We briefly wanted to share an experience in Colombia. Colombia, as you know, is one of the world's cultural and natural mega diverse hotspots. Conflicts and complex conditions have been the norm for many decades. Generating a collective sense of place and creating open dialogue that leads to the appropriation of cultural and natural heritage as a handrail to peaceful interactions in the territory have proven fundamental. We have used this community-centered and holistic approach to create interpretative frameworks around many national parks of the country. We have worked in Amacayacu, in the Amazon Basin, Utria and the Gulf of Triuga in the Pacific coast, and moving into the mountains to Otunquimbaya in the Central Andes, and the glacier-covered Sierra Nevada del Cocuy in the Eastern Andes. Finally, moving towards the Caribbean coast and into Flamencos and the Tayrona National Park. Tayrona is one of the most visited national parks in the country. It represents Colombian diversity. With 4 strong indigenous communities present, the Kogi, Arhuacos, Cancuamos, and Wiwas, local inhabitants, and many that came during decades escaping from violence in other areas of the country, academic, civil society, and governmental organizations, including a couple of national parks, indigenous reserves, and archaeological parks. Geographical features that range from the ocean to the mountaintops with 5,700 meters of altitude in less than 45 linear kilometers. All of Colombia's complexities are and have been alive in Tayrona for decades. Partnering with the national park units of Colombia, we gathered the amplest set of actors for a 5-day process. The process slowly started to rev up under a large kiosk, protecting us from the Caribbean heat. We began breaking barriers and generating an inclusive open space. As conversations evolved, the territory's timeline started taking shape, and emerging themes started to speak. Local actors identified the cultural and natural attributes of the Tayrona. Multicultural working groups started presenting and sharing as we recorded and identified commonalities and connectors. Visual recording of the process really helped significantly to capture essential elements and allow for feedback and for further conversations. On the 4th day, all the pieces were there. We created a petit comité, including local reps, to work throughout the night and give structural shape and language to the framework's first draft. On the 5th day, we validated and opened for additional feedback, conversations, and creating mechanisms to make the framework a live document. Interpretative frameworks are allowed to evolve as time and events or discoveries occur. Considering getting all the actors together is not always an option. We have also evolved a method to create and develop holistic frameworks as more actors can participate, building groups and then connecting them. A holistic approach to interpretation allows the territory's voice to be heard. In the process, it allows individuals and communities to find a common essence and place to work together to understand, treasure, and learn to share their cultural and natural heritage. Thanks again for listening, and I'll send it back to you, Jon. Bye.
We're all familiar with conventional training. That's one-off. It's decontextualized. Learning is assumed to take place in a sequestered environment like a classroom rather than the actual work environment where students encounter real problems and challenges to implementing what they've just learned. Program design is often top-down from teacher to student. The focus is on the student in the sense that it's not focusing on the context, even though people oftentimes call this teacher-focused as well. The focus is also on the exterior aspect of the student and not the interior mental welfare and its role on learning. Fortunately, there is another way, a holistic way. And to see how the holistic form began with my organization, the PUP Consortium, we have to go back to 1997 in Honduras, when I worked for the Rare Center for Tropical Conservation. There we had what some called the Cadillac of guide training, which integrated conservation, English for specific purpose, natural and cultural history, guiding, conservation, all of it into one 70-day course in a sequestered environment. We worked with people who came from communities around national parks. We had a staff of 6 to 8 people in an English-only environment. So we integrated all of these different learning areas together while doing in one sort of holistic context. We also, as our program matured, we spent much more effort thinking about adult learning theory. And adult learning says that people are much more motivated to learn, adults in particular, when they are trying to solve real life problems that they face in their own work or personal life environments. So we work with the guides to try and overcome the actual challenges that they have, both in the training as well as in their work context. And here we have a training in El Cocuy National Park in Colombia in 2012, where the guides, most of them are tour operators of small tours and service providers around the park, and looking to improve their income. Another aspect, very important for our holistic approach to interpretation, is dealing with the mental welfare of the participants. Because how a student thinks and how he or she feels has a very strong effect on their ability to concentrate, on their motivation, their ability to integrate what they're encountering experience into their own lives, into their own real performance where they work. So we've integrated this interior aspect, this psychological aspect, formally into our program design. Later still, we realized that, we've all have this experience where we come back from a conference or we come back from a training all excited about new ideas that we've encountered and all enthusiastic to try to implement them in our work environment. And then what happens? Nothing happens. Why? Because nobody else in your work environment feels the same excitement. They didn't go through the experience that you went through in the training or the conference. There's no resources to implement it. Maybe your boss hasn't created the time or the space to put it in practice because it'll require training in the system. So all of these and other barriers emerge to stop you from implementing the ideas and the new skills that you just encountered. And if learning is defined as a change of behavior, as it is in the organizational learning world, then even though you may have learned this great idea, if you can't implement it and change your and your organization's behavior, arguably no learning really occurred. So if this is the case, then what we learned and what we added to our methodology was an analysis of this workplace context. We actually had a student from the United States come down, an undergraduate, and worked with us to design a study. And the study was carried out in a private nature reserve, a for-profit called Mystico Park, where we analyzed this work context, the incentives and the barriers, to see how well this organization, this business, could receive and support recent graduates, recent guides who went through a training program. And once we have the answer to that, what kind of investments does this business need to make in its own institution, in its own support, so that guides don't lose what they just learned? Tilden says working with the whole person. Aim at the interior, the emotions, as well as the exterior, which is exactly what we do. We work with emotions, the fears, the motivations of everybody, as well as their external measurable skills, their behaviors, their knowledge. And of course, Tilden was referring to tourists, but it works equally well to students and guides. So we also work not just with the interior of the guide and the exterior of the guide, but the collective interior, which is culture, because every guide is embedded in culture at various levels, which influences how they see themselves and how they operate and how they are received by the world. That culture includes their organization, it includes their industry, the whole world, as well as their country and their profession. So all of these different levels have cultural factors that influence on how they behave and how they see themselves. And in this particular picture, we can see Yvonne Oviedo on the right. She's our country representative and our trainer in Honduras. And she's working very closely with the guides to try and integrate these three different spheres into the training to get the best results. Another aspect that's very important, as I've mentioned before, the work context. And one of those elements in the work context are the people that the guide works with. So if they work in an institution, they're working with supervisors and probably other guides. If they're working independently, they may also be working with other guides. So we try to encourage members of this team to be trained together so that they all can understand this concept and start thinking about how they're going to implement it in their work context. In this particular photo from another training in Honduras, we see the public use supervisor in Lancetia Botanical Garden. In the lower right, it's the guy with the blue shirt, as well as the director of guides, which is the woman right next to him. So some of the benefits of a holistic approach, well, I wanted to share with you a couple of our graduates. This is Victor. He's from Honduras, And after this course, he was able to develop some additional guiding products that he hadn't had before. And another graduate, in this case, 2 graduates from our training in El Cocuy National Park in Colombia. Now, they were independents, and what they did afterwards is they actually created a museum called the Museo Vivo de la Ruta de la Sal, the salt route, which was used by both indigenous and Spanish when they arrived later. Another area of benefit is that not only are we training the students, but we're training the trainers. So in Colombia, for example, I showed you Yvonne in Honduras. Here we have Carlos Rosero, who's the guy on his knees. He's our country representative and our principal trainer. And now Colombia has a team that's capable of carrying out most of our interpretive training without our direct help. It's necessary. So ultimately then, this training is holistic because it draws from the 3 fundamental perspectives, as you can see in the Triskel there. There's the I perspective, that's the internal aspect of the guides. We work with their mental welfare and their fears and their motivations to try and help them be better prepared psychologically for this training program. Then there's the we sphere, that's the interior collective, the culture. And of course, we work with the culture at those different levels, right? Individual cultures and all the way up to the global culture. And then we have the it, which is the exterior aspect of both the guides, their skills, their behaviors, as well as the exterior of their context. And all 3 of them have to be integrated in order to have a holistic training approach. In this picture, which was painted by one of the graduates of our Honduras program, who obviously was a painter, after the course, and we didn't solicit this, I promise, he gave us this, he gifted us this picture, which he called Breaking Paradigms, which for him was symbolic of the holistic training approach.
Well, there you have it. 5 presentations from colleagues who represent the PUP Global Heritage Consortium from across the Americas, brought to you with no consumption of jet fuel whatsoever. Hey, I'm Sherwood Shankland, a group facilitator from Centennial, Colorado, serving on the PUP Board of Directors. I will briefly wrap up this session with a note of thanks and a short recap. First, thanks to NAI for going ahead with this conference online. Secondly, thanks to each of you who have made this journey across the Americas with us today. And lastly, thanks to our 5 presenters for sharing their experience with us, and to Clark Hancock, for our treasurer, who organized the session. In summary then, Dr. Antonieta Jiménez from Mexico reminded us of the deep connections linking culture, nature, and humanity. We are all working for a better future where people thrive in their heritage, address crucial issues, and develop integrated, sustainable patterns from which to grow. These deep connections are the foundation for holistic approaches to interpretive planning, training, and leadership. Secondly, Dr. Trace Gale from the Patagonia region of Chile, with her supporting cast of beautiful dogs, spoke to us about the complex set of issues and social pressures that surround us as we plan, guide, and interpret our natural surroundings. In the Coyhaique National Reserve, she used the 3-part Tiscali diagram of I, we, and it, a holistic framework to design her work with fully engaged local stakeholders. Mike Mayer of Tucson, Arizona, shared his story about the work done by the Métis Nation of Alberta, Canada, to preserve and celebrate their rich culture for future generations. Mike did a deep dive into experiential interpretive design, a highly collaborative process engaging the Indigenous community to shape their own plans and revitalize their cultural roots. Luis Camargo from Colombia explored the importance of listening to the voice of territory as it emerges from the unique aspects of the land and the historic journey of the people. By deeply engaging local residents from the start, ownership of the plans is built into the process, leading to a strong commitment to implementation. Our final presentation was made by Jon Kohl from Costa Rica, the founder and executive director of the PUP Global Heritage Consortium. Jon showed us examples from Honduras of a holistic approach to interpretive training and its lasting benefits. To establish training which endures over time, they simultaneously train students and trainers, transferring the curriculum to the students and the training methods to the locally based facilitators. The interchange that we are having today is one dimension of being a global consortium. As you have seen, PUP is comprised of professionals in many disciplines. We are using integrated tools and frameworks to advance holistic heritage initiatives. We hope that today you have picked up an insight or two that connects to your own work. We would like to hear from you and continue this interchange. Holistic approaches include active participation of all stakeholders and is based on three fundamental perspectives. First is the internal, individual perspective of all participants, which is often overlooked, especially in large development projects. Secondly, we, the internal, collective perspective or culture, which is easily forgotten in projects that focus on technology and science. Thirdly, the exterior perspective, looking at the physical world that can be objectively measured, people's skills or tools, plans or systems. Including all three of these perspectives is what we mean by a holistic approach. Leave out any of these three perspectives and you miss an important part of reality, increasing the chances of project delays or failure. We hope by including these three perspectives, our planning, interpretation, and training will yield better results in an increasingly complex and uncertain world. Finally, I invite you to visit our website or share your comments on Facebook, where you can discover more about this exciting network of colleagues. With a couple of clicks, you can access our newsletter, our history, and an application to become a PUP member. We hope you will. Thanks again for joining this session. We look forward to sharing additional experiences with you and learning about your initiatives, struggles, and breakthroughs. So long, stay safe, and let's keep in touch.